So tonight at the Active Travel Cafe, we will start as usual with our crowdsourced news update. And just before we get to that, I'll let you all know that our speakers tonight are Graham Smith, urban designer, who sounds to me like he's good at finding the gaps between urban design and architecture, particularly where transport comes in. And we've got Patrick Lingwood, the active travel lead for the Oxfordshire County Council. So we'll get through news and then we'll come back to hear from Graham and Patrick talking about this study tour of Utrecht. Right. First up, well, I'm going to share my news. I'm off to the Netherlands in just a few days' time, so I'll be taking notes, Graham and Patrick, but I see we've already got some hands popping up for the news. Simon, you are first up.
I was just going to say, apparently the job advert for our new CEO is now live. So if you want to come and be the CEO of London Cycling Campaign and be my boss, I will put the link in the chat for anyone who feels suitably qualified, passionate and possibly insane. We will much miss Ashok, but I'm sure we'll do just fine with the next person involved.
Wow, big news, big change for London Cycling Campaign, Simon. All right. Thanks for sharing. Bob, you're up.
Okay, hi.
Hello.
Yeah, a couple of points on the third-party report on the policing front. On Twitter, Warwickshire Road Safety Partnership. Don't forget, this is police and crime commissioner, various road safety boards, the council did some misleading tweeting, which everybody got upset about and jumped on them. And then the same week, Essex Road Safety Partnership, talking about third-party reporting, has said, yeah, this is okay from cyclists, but not if they're deliberately going out looking for people who are driving badly, which is pretty weird and not really the kind of stuff you should be getting from police. So this is again all in the area of culture. And just to remind people that there's the Landor Active Travel, it's Active County, Cycling County, I forget the exact title. This year it's the big Active Travel Fest run by Landor, the publishers of LGT, and it's going to be in Oxford, which is where Graham and Patrick come from. And also at it will be me speaking on the culture wars issue, and also there will be Active Travel Cafe will be there. That's something to think about. You'll see the adverts. It's in July, and that's my basic quickie.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for the news. Yes, we'll certainly be keeping the group informed about the plans for Active Travel Cafe in Oxford in July. So watch this space. It'll be slightly better than me live streaming with a margarita like last year. Right, Jill, news from you.
Hiya. I'm a teacher, so I get home quickly from work for this. And just want to tell people that the results of the Sustrans Big Walk and Wheel to School, Big Pedal, as was, have just been published. And it's really worth people going a lot on. I'll put the link in the chat to see what your local schools are doing. I'm incredibly proud that my school, we came 5th nationally, and we got over 72% with our year 7 group. It's the one thing to bear in mind is that the percentages are out of the entire school roll. They did a little bit of tweaking last year, so you actually put your attendance data in because of COVID, but this year it's out of your entire school roll. So when I actually spoke with the attendance people, I've now got really robust data that tells me that over 80%, well, often it's usually around 80% of our year 7, so 11 and 12-year-olds actually walk or wheel or scoot to school. And of course, we're always saying to people that the infrastructure has to be safe enough and appropriate enough for an unaccompanied 12-year-old. Well, now I've got evidence that 80% of my 240 11 and 12-year-olds are actually wanting to get to school in an active travel way. And as I say, it's just useful to use. It's good data, it's local data, and use it for whatever you might do. My head is very keen to be publicised locally. And so again, it's just a good news story for everybody, and it proves that the children are keen to travel in an active fashion.
Brilliant. That's great news and good advice, Jill. And I think you may have just landed yourself on our list of future potential speakers, so we can hear more about how you did it and what you can do next. So Jill, if you don't mind sending Claire an email, a message if she doesn't have it, so we can get in touch, because I would really like to hear more about that. Excellent. Right, I've got Paul Streets from Cardiff. You're up. What's your news?
Hi folks. Yeah, it's a news from Cardiff. Some of you will know that Cardiff Council published a transport white paper about 18 months ago now, which was a kind of a potential vision for transport in and around Cardiff. They've dusted that off very publicly in the last week by kickstarting a consultation on road user payments. So they said there's all sorts of things on the table. Sorry, things like clean air zones, ultra low emission zones, workplace parking levies, all that kind of good stuff. And one of the fundamental tenets of the white paper was that the need to generate revenue to feed into public transport and active travel infrastructure improvements. Cardiff Cycle City campaigning group that I'm part of, we're amongst those bodies being consulted, which is good. The consultation should take about 12 months, and I think there's a decision due in about 18 months. So keep your fingers crossed, and I'll let you know what they come up with.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. H, have you got some news?
Yeah, well, it was Pedal on Parliament this Saturday, and we rode from, well, I didn't ride all the way, but a group rode from Glasgow in memory of Emma. Emma, oh, I forget, it's a double-barrel surname, but she was killed in January by a left-turning truck on the main road through Glasgow. And there was a very moving eulogy to Emma that was read out to everybody there. And there's going to be, they're hoping to have a little bit of a celebration of Emma's life, because she lived in London as well, sometime in June in London, but they're looking for a venue and getting that moving. Hopefully we can get the eulogy video that was promoted. It was very, very moving. And it also led me to investigate a crash which happened 4 years ago, where the woman was killed, and they still haven't repaired the railing she was crushed against. That is appalling. There is nothing happened, and I think that needs to be highlighted. These crashes happen, nothing happens, no investigation, nothing.
Yeah, thank you. Claire, back to you with your news.
Yeah, I was actually going to share that one, so I'm just putting the links in the chat. But a really moving piece from Emma's parents in the Scotsman, which I've just posted in the chat. And also some great photos on Pedal on Parliament, which is an annual event in Scotland. But thanks to H for giving that report on the ground on that one.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And Robin Tucker.
Yeah. So one good one bad one from Oxford this week. The bad one is we've had bollard vandalism, so it's starting to resurge. So we had these big thick wooden bollards, and one of them has been sawn off, and one of them, we think the lock has been cut and the bollard has been stolen. The good news is that Oxford City Council has announced that it will be signing up to CLOCS, the construction logistics operators something safety scheme. I can't remember all the words, but it's basically safer operations of construction trucks, both in vehicle design and the routes that they take. I will post 2 links in the chat for you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robin. Have we got any more news from anyone either in the chat or who wishes to put their hand up? No. Well, I'm then going to take a small part of the news announcements and just mention that CamCycle in Cambridge is currently participating in something called the Big Give Green Match Fund. And I highly recommend this to other cycling campaigning organisations. I do think you need to be registered as some form of charity, but it's a match funding campaign. So any donations made to CamCycle up until noon on Thursday will be doubled. I can see London Cycling Campaign is also taking part in the Big Green Give Match Fund. So perhaps, Simon, you can pop a link to the Big Give in the chat, and good for other people to look at if you're looking at ways to fundraise for your campaign in your patch. And of course, if you like what London or Cambridge or any of the other organisations on there are doing, you could send a donation that way also. But I know it's very hard for campaigns to find that kind of funding, so I highly recommend it. Right, any other news? Otherwise, I shall get us over to our guest speakers. Right, Claire, if you could get the slides going, I'll just briefly introduce Graham and Patrick again for those who may have joined a bit later. Excellent. So we've got Graham Smith and Patrick Lingwood from Oxford, and they are reporting on the study tour they recently went to in the Netherlands. So over to you, Graham or Patrick, whoever's up first.
It's Graham Smith speaking. Patrick will no doubt come in a moment. I'd had in my mind since Christmas that I must go to the Netherlands, and Patrick, we happened to meet Patrick, and I said this to him. We've known for each other for years. Said he was interested, which was the spur to go. I've been there many times before. We went to Delft for 2 or 3 nights and Utrecht for 4 nights. We met Andre Pettinger in Utrecht. We met Steven Skapel and the lady whose name has escaped from me, who's been part of cycle campaigning in Delft for a long time. But tonight we're talking specifically about Utrecht. And does Patrick want to say how much he enjoyed it?
Right, yeah, shall I start? So, I mean, I work at Oxfordshire County Council and kind of responsible for kind of ensuring good design and good infrastructure in Oxfordshire and Oxford, and in particular Oxford, we have the challenge of trying to increase cycling by 50% by 2030, which would put us the same level as Cambridge. So really, I wanted to learn from best practice. And this page, this first page, I won't go through all the details, but Utrecht really is top of everywhere, really. It's kind of the second most bicycle friendly city. It's got really high levels of cycling. It's got new development, which is promoting cycling, and its cycling is still increasing. So it really ticked all the boxes that to understand, and it's an urban 340,000, it's bigger than Oxford, but it's not so huge like Amsterdam. It's something that I could apply kind of locally. So I grabbed the opportunity when Graham, our local expert on said go to the Netherlands, and we'll share the slide. You can read all the details. So basically that gives you all the evidence that Utrecht is the place to go. So should we go on to the second slide?
Can we move the slide on, please, Claire?
And whilst it's moving on, basically...
Hang on, they're just stuck, so give me a moment.
The slides just didn't want to work for us today, did they?
All right.
Here we go.
First one. Give more details to the first why Utrecht is such a good place.
Can't get them to move. No.
That's okay, Claire.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we could try and share from here, and I'll download them, and maybe I can take on the slide sharing.
Well, whilst that happens, I mean, basically, we went there to kind of, I went there particularly to understand what the network is like. I mean, I've read lots about Dutch cycling, but I'd never actually been in the Netherlands as a cyclist and as a cycle planner, basically. So I wanted to understand how they treated urban roads, how they created new developments, and to kind of really kind of understand what we can learn from and what we can't. I mean, where there are fundamental differences. And we're still on the right page. But I mean, I was verbally, I mean, I came away with 3 things. This is the 3 things I came. without going into the details. So first of all, when you're cycling in Utrecht, and you're including in the rural area, you're always on something meant for cycling. Now, it may be a shared road, it may be a path, it may be a cycle lane, but you're always on something. You don't stray accidentally onto the car world, because they do have a car world as well. They've got motorways, they've got big roads, but you don't stray onto it accidentally. So that's the first thing I learned. So basically you've got, which makes me think you've got to redesign the whole city, not just little bits of it. And that's the first important thing. And the second thing is they have a whole palette of designs. They don't say we can't do that. I mean, gear changes, you can't have cycle lanes, which is totally stupid. It says, so they've got cycle paths, they've got cycle lanes, they've got low traffic neighborhoods, which we have as well. They've got cycle tracks alongside roads. So they use a whole palette of different designs, and they have cycle streets, which are really important, which I missed. And but the third thing I found most interesting is the kind of, there's a confidence that Dutch have a confidence when they're on a cycle, on a thing meant for cycling, and it can be a shared path, it can be a cycle street with other traffic, but they have the confidence that they are, in a sense, they own the road, as it were, they own the path. And equally, the Dutch drivers, they're no better than English drivers, except they do not hassle cyclists. They just defer the legitimacy to cyclists. And I came over those are the three learnings. And I'll let it go over to Graham to look at the actual things we saw mostly, but if we can get there, or can't we get there? The slides.
Can we have slide 3?
We're working on it. The slides aren't working. I'm just about to reshare and see if they'll work from my end. I'm very sorry.
Nearly excellent. Can we go full screen?
We're working on it. One moment. There we
Excellent.
go.
Well, I'll introduce this. Patrick wanted to see some segregated roundabouts, and we couldn't find any in the immediate inner city, and we managed to miss them traveling between Delft and Utrecht by train. So we headed out to northwest Utrecht, to the region of Utrecht, where there were a couple of these things. And Patrick took video cycling around these carefully, not looking left or right. He looked like a typical Englishman doing this, and enjoyed the experience. But the reason that I'm showing this slide is that one of the main things that I wanted to see was what in English appears to be called edge lane roads, what in Dutch is suggestie-stroken, and Kernfahrbahn in German, and there's a French word as well. And we were looking at this island on the left, and then we started heading right down Princess Irene-Laan, and we were completely bowled over by what we were seeing, because next slide, please. Hopefully, because the cycle lane had been what had been advisory cycle lanes on black asphalt, and only about a metre or metre and a half before about 2016, had been changed to much wider. Gosh, it's hard work, this, isn't it? As you see there, and that one, yes. And it was astonishing. It was 30 kilometers. There was a radar speed reminder. There are speed humps along it. I think this is also a bus route. So obviously they don't have Oxford buses there. They can have speed humps out in the suburbs. And it struck us as being quite astonishing. Can we have the next slide? And Patrick's taken this one, but this is adjacent to the exit from the motorway on the western side of Utrecht, going into the centre, a 2-lane cycle way on each side of the road in this case, going straight across side roads, or I think in this instance it was a filling station entrance, which is also unusual in English terms. Next one, please. And we'll focus mostly on the two areas in the yellow boxes, which are the if you are familiar with Utrecht, the canal ring around Utrecht, and Catherine Single on the left-hand side on the west, and Marley Single on the right. The whole of the inner canal ringway was muted to become, I think, a dual carriageway in the 60s. It happened a little bit on the left, but not on the right-hand side. Next one, please, Marley. So this road is Marley Single. So this is the eastern side of the canal ring, and it has been changed in 2016 from having a 2-lane road with two segregated lanes of about 1.5 meters on each side to this situation. In fact, I've been observing these things happening rather naively without being told why, because I've been taking urban design groups for many years to the Netherlands, and we both knew that this is really significant because some of the work that Patrick has been trying to do, or has been doing in Oxford with Quickways routes, does something like this. In other words, put a wide cycle lane and narrowed general car lane. But he's had, you'll probably say, great problems with Active Travel England, who don't want to support paint. I suppose the thing that we can take from the Dutch example is that the red is added, red asphalt has been added, it doesn't wear out. And the other thing that might shock English engineers is an asphalt road has been changed to a road that's, as you can see, quite narrow in the center. I'm just trying to see the dimensions, but that chat function has come up and stopped it 2.5 meters.
2.5 meters.
But these are bricks that have been added in the road center to add texture and to add noise, if you like, to for drivers. Do you want to say any more about that, Patrick?
I think it exemplifies one of the differences between Netherlands, and it's the fact that brickwork is used extensively, and I don't think there's any chance of us introducing that in the UK in any way. So they have more, they can give more messages by the surfacing. So they can have the red surface, they can have brickwork, and they can have tarmac, and they all mean something different to Dutch cyclists, sorry, to Dutch drivers and Dutch cyclists. So it's one of the kind of, it's one of those, that messaging is, I think, one of the key things that the Dutch do, and it helps. So the driver know, I'm on tarmac, I'm on my space, I'm on red paving, I'm on a shared space, it's red asphalt, it's cyclist space. And you don't need, I suppose what it doesn't, you don't need the barriers to have that message, because the visual are creating those barriers. But in this case,
we must move on, Patrick, otherwise
yeah.
we'll be shouted at. The reason for this work in part was that there's a canal on the left-hand side of the left-hand picture, the main inner city ring canal, and it had no footpath along it. So one of the arguments from a pedestrian point of view is that this has been added and has provoked the changes in thinking. Can we have the next slide? Or is that not going to be so easy? And here's a version that has a wider 4.7 meter center, but again, alongside a footpath, which I think is a new footpath alongside what I think is the inner ring canal. Could we have the next one?
Well, can we stay just a moment? This, okay. You're going to say right. But just this actually always mirrors what we did in Oxford on Morden Bridge, which is a very busy bridge in Oxford, which has about 10,000 cyclists a day and about 10,000 cars. And this has something similar. I mean, I haven't still found the figure, but it must be around about 8,000 cars and 12,000 cyclists. And as you can see, that cyclists ride two abreast on the thing, but cars actually have to move into the cycle lanes, but they do so only when there are no cyclists there.
Next one. We go through this quickly, but many of you will know this, but the left-hand picture is Utrecht in the 70s, 80s with a sunken dual carriageway, which replaced a canal. And over the recent decade or two, they've replaced that dual carriageway with a canal again, as you see on the right hand side. And this is a Catherine single, and we'll be talking about that in the next slide. So coming south from the central station and central business district in the distance on the left hand side, you have a segregated cycle path, and on the right hand side, sorry, the left hand side picture is a wide road that was a canal up until 10 years back. And on the right hand side is what it is now, the segregated cycle lane, and this is the thing that excited and flummoxed us, has been removed, and a wide asphalt cycle lane has been added, and a rather narrow, probably less than 5 meters, bricked central area. And we sat and observed this for hours, I think, and were completely blown apart about the way it worked. Could I have the next one? Patrick might want to say something. So this is a before situation. So the canal, this is an existing part of the canal, and a bridge, Bartholomew Bridge, that goes to the old centre. And it had a fully worked highway engineer's wet dream of paintwork and segregated cycle lanes at the side. And that's been changed to one large red area. Next slide. And so this is the, as you're coming south, the left-hand turn to go across the bridge. It becomes effectively a shared carriageway. There is a lot of traffic. Obviously, I'm showing you one that's got a father and child. I don't, my Dutch isn't good enough to know whether he's shouting at the child saying, turn left, turn left, or whether he's just, but she seemed to be quite confident and comfortable, and obviously well below 11. Next slide.
Well, before we leave, I mean, this was the same kind of image. I mean, that's what really struck me. This is a road, which I've kind of said it's the same road with 8,000 vehicles on it. And yet, and it goes into this shared cycle street where the whole is cyclist priority. But the fact that this father, but as you can see from the next image, there were children on this, you know, young children, move basically what would be in England, be turning right, and here they're turning left. So they'd be crossing any traffic which could be following at this point. So I just think that's the confidence that the cyclists had, as well as the deference to cyclists that the drivers had, even though they themselves were actually no different from English drivers in other ways.
Next one. Bev asked a question about the brickwork and does it need replacing. We did actually observe some brickwork being replaced. I mean, generally, one of the things that's always delighted me about this part of Utrecht, I've seen quite often, if you want to relay a street that's deformed, you send out a few cubic meters of sand, a skilled bloke or a skilled bricklayer, and one assistant or maybe a couple of assistants with a wheelbarrow. They take up the bricks, put them on the sidewalk, smooth the road with extra sand, put the same bricks back down. It's a sight to behold. So just another child. So this whole area, this huge red area, is, well, the red asphalt in the Netherlands means it means cycle street. Utrecht is obviously special. They've just done a bicycle street, or redone a bicycle street after 25 years in Burgermaster Riestraat. Next slide, please. And this is the end of the red area where it goes into, I think, a less changed bit with a segregated path on the right-hand side and parking in the middle. And there's Patrick looking happy. Do you want to say anything, or next slide? We're coming towards the end.
I think the reason why they've changed from cycle track to cycle street and cycle lanes is, I think, because they want to encourage people not to go through the city centre and to take this road instead, because the city centre is suffering from, let's say, cyclist congestion, and the capacity of this would be much higher than the cycle track, which is kind of tends to end up with big queues, which is the thing which we kind of Dutch are famous for nowadays, is queues of cyclists at cycle tracks where they read the signals. So because it's no longer signalized, that's the point. This is now a left turn, or what would be to us a right turn, without signals. It's a free flowing turn.
Next slide, please, Ruth. And this is a bit of the older work, and it was possibly because it got a bit duller, and I think it even started raining again when we got to the southern end of Katrina Single, and it goes into 2 lanes. So this bit is what I would have thought a couple of years ago was perfect, a massive separation between the cycle path and the general carriageway, and suddenly, compared with the stuff we'd been looking at earlier, it looked oppressive and constraining, which the earlier bit doesn't. Next one. Oh, and I'd finish off here with a quote from Bicycle Dutch, which also took us by surprise, that the rules on recommended width for cycle lane has now gone to 2.3 meters. And I think there's one more slide after that. Well, we draw the lesson that this approach, and obviously the percentage of the ratio is very different in the Netherlands from much of the UK, but not everywhere in the UK. That the segregated path that we think is nirvana is also a constraint for cyclists. And also, by taking the cyclists away from the carriageway, it leaves other motorists feeling that they've got their own space, which itself might psychologically not be the right thing. So by making wider and smooth lanes for cycling and narrower and less comfortable and slightly noisier road for general motor traffic, they're working on a psychology that we've not much experienced. And that's the end of what I'm going to say. Patrick? Perhaps I better say this because, now Patrick, I'll say so that you don't get shouted at, but it seems to us that with Active Travel England not wanting to fund painted cycle lanes, maybe resurfaced red cycle lanes are fundable, but it seems to be a limitation on the approach that they've taken of wanting segregation in the Active Travel in the latest tranche 4 stuff. Do you want to add anything, Patrick?
No, I just if there was a YouTube video which was done 2 years ago, so it's not, but which called bicycle ride around Utrecht or something, or around Utrecht canal ring, which somebody just rode around the whole thing. So you can actually, it's quite interesting to watch. It takes about 20 minutes to watch. There's no so just so you can get a moving image of this. I recommend watching it if you can't go to Utrecht itself, but I recommend going to Utrecht. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Graham and Patrick. First question, did you have a really good time?
Dodging
Yes,
the hail, dodging the hail and the gale force wind on the way back,
Yes.
that made me miss the boat because I'm no longer as fast as I used to be, and Patrick tried pushing me at one point. No, it was fantastic, utterly fantastic.
Brilliant. I have actually raced to the boat in hail before as well, so I definitely know that pain. Patrick, sorry.
Actually, it's one thing the Dutch don't know, and it really is strange. They haven't learned about hedges. Hedges cuts down wind, and on the journey from Utrecht to well, not quite Hook of Holland, but there were only 2 tiny properties of hedges. They really should learn about hedges, and it really would make a difference.
All right, I'll send that to the Dutch Cycling Embassy. Okay, have we got some questions either in the chat or some hands up? I will say I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and we're having some very interesting conversation about paving, block work, paving machines and so on in the Netherlands. And I will say it's definitely worth a Google, because the skill and craftsmanship that goes into creating these perfect block work streets is actually really, really fascinating. Excellent. Okay, here we go. We've got some questions coming through. So Shane from Galway wants to know, are there particular volumes of cars and bikes that are necessary before edge lanes can be applied?
That's a really interesting question. I failed to get an authoritative comment on this from Utrecht, and I'm sure someone will either know or will find out in the next week or two. I've been watching this happening since the 90s, taking student groups and engineer groups, and on much smaller roads, where it seemed obvious, and it was explained to me on some points, that we do it in asphalt to make it more comfortable for cyclists. But you never quite know whether the Dutch people that you're meeting are saying what you want to hear, or quoting from the book. So I was really surprised to, over the last 6 months, to learn how much more organized and how much bigger roads are being dealt with. The question that we have, I mean, Oxford has a reasonable amount of cycling. Magdalen Bridge has an impressive amount of cycling and is not unlike this. But it seems to me that we have to push in a number of directions. So if you don't have a road, if you've got a bylaw street that's 7.3 meters, or anyway, less than 9 meters, you can't put segregation in unless you can massively change circulation patterns and filter. Everywhere is filtering, well, many places are beginning to filter more and more. And of course, the Dutch have been filtering for 20 or 30 years or more. If you don't go in the right entrance into Amsterdam, you might never find your hotel. So I don't have an answer to this. I mean, maybe if you've got 50,000 vehicles a day, it's difficult. Patrick.
I'll give a shorter answer. I think cycle lanes should never be below 1.5 meters. I think actually cycle lanes will work in many places, as long as there's some cyclists, and as long as, I think it gets more difficult when you start doing cycle streets, because at that point, the Dutch have the principle that for every cyclist there should be, I mean, there should be no more than one car, so it's kind of a balance. But I think actually, I think the important thing is, though, I think the evidence is that networks is what makes important. There's no use doing 100 meters of cycle, lovely cycle track, if you then go back on road and there's nothing. So it's better to have something than nothing. So a site, if you can get, and cycle lanes are kind of in cost terms about at least a third of, no, probably about 1/10 of the cost of putting kind of off-road cycle tracks, and they're also about 3 times as quick to put in. I mean, we put all our cycle lanes for Tranche 2 in about 2 years for £3 million, and that did 6 of the radials of Oxford out of the so it suddenly transformed them, and we know from the data that the cycling has increased on those quite impressively on those radials to put the cycle lanes on, and I think it would apply for most places.
I'm going to throw a rhetorical question in here of at what particular volume of bikes and cars do you take out the lanes because the bikes don't fit in them and they need the whole road space? But that's a question for someone who's had a visit in Amsterdam in particular.
There is a bit of an answer to that, Roxanne. When we met Patrick Andre Pettinger, who had worked in the city administration and is a consultant now, that he wouldn't give us numbers. He was being very Dutch about it. He said the key thing is to consider the place. In other words, the people moving, the people walking, the vehicles driving, and frontage activity, and all of those things. It could have been a kind of slowing off the question, but I had that question in mind and I tried it, but I was told, be an urban designer, stop being a highway bloody engineer.
And it's worth adding another thing, but we've shown the places where there are still dry cars. There was a parallel street where basically they've actually more or less taken out all traffic. So it's become basically a cycle street. I don't know what you remember the name of it. The one we then cycled along on the other side of that. So that it is there's traffic management, which you don't see very much, but it's happening all the time in the Dutch things as well. And that's another key element.
Mm-hmm. Right, let's move on. James Avery has a question. Do you agree with concerns about or from pedestrians, or do you think they are used as a fallacy, often in the name of disability, as if there is no such thing as a disabled cyclist? So I guess that's where that sense that the hierarchy in the Netherlands is more bikes before people walking. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I perhaps Graham should be answered, but I'll just give my first impressions. I think the pedestrians recognize the cycle hierarchy, but actually what we've seen from those images is the Dutch actually now are doing a lot more to actually improve the space of pedestrians. I mean, the fact that some of those ring roads have been, the road has been narrowed to put in paths along the by the canal, and I think pedestrians actually do okay. And I mean, they're not the Dutch cyclists may be the top at sometimes, but through the centre of Utrecht, pedestrians are just all over the place. It's basically all pedestrian streets, really, even when there's cyclists there. Well, nearly all.
Graham, you're on mute, but if you want to come in.
I can remember seeing a graph, a chart which I should have kept handy, that seemed to suggest that the ratio between pedestrians and cyclists in the UK, I think in the UK and the Netherlands, was kind of reversed. There were much smaller numbers of pedestrians, a much greater number of people on bikes, but I haven't got it to hand. But as Patrick said, I agree with
we have higher levels of, we have actually some of the highest levels of pedestrians in Europe. And I think that is in part because we have such low levels of cycling. Not that, but then in Oxford Oxford actually has the second highest level of cycling, but it actually also has about the 4th and 5th highest level of pedestrians as well. So it can quite often go, and we vie with several inner London boroughs in terms of our levels of walking. So the two can live together. Lots of walking and lots of cycling.
Okay, right. I'm going to go to a hands up question before I go back to some of the questions that have come through in the chat. So John D, would you like to ask your question?
That's interesting because it's actually John M, but whatever.
Oh. Okay, well, John D, well, John someone.
There seems to be a conversation about numbers of vehicles and cyclists and ratios. This is covered in the Dutch bicycle design manual issued by Crow, as Graham will attest to. So you can find that kind of information if you look at the standard reference documents for highways design in the Netherlands. The other point I would make, and Graham and Patrick have noted this tactile difference, that includes footways. So you'll find that there is a standard kind of tactile nomenclature for all urban areas in the Netherlands. So everybody, it helps particularly the blind, because they can tell the difference between vehicles on different parts of the road and what kind of vehicles they are. It makes life a lot simpler for the highways designer. Anyway, those comments, just to be trying to be a bit helpful.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for those comments, John. Right, I shall go back to some questions. So we had from Simon, given where our cities and countries are now and where the Dutch are, what do you think are the top 3 things we should realistically do to get from here to there? So if you could wave your magic wand, what 3 things would you bring over?
Can I comment?
Yeah.
Patrick, if those of you who come to Oxford to see the conference will see some of this. At the beginning of COVID, Patrick put in what are effectively edge lane roads. He called them they're called quickways in Oxfordshire, and removed about 500 parking places overnight on all of the main roads on which these were installed. And because there were so many other things happening, we keep on saying to each other, it's unbelievable that we removed, or that he removed this parking. So clearly removing the parking on main roads is a terribly important first step. And Patrick's example is evidence is that you get no complaints.
Yeah, well, not quite no complaints.
Yes,
well, I would say, well, I think there's three elements. If you really want to transform, it is to do a network, and the network will consist of lots of things, but it's the network matters. No, it's from your edge of your town to the middle. I mean, I'm thinking urban areas at the moment. And then I think, which is hard enough, but the next thing is traffic management, and traffic management means lots of things. It means introducing parking charges. It means introducing controlled parking zones. It means removing parking on you know, in terms of putting cycle lanes in. So that's the second thing. But the third thing is have some brave politicians, and who are willing to take these risks. And that applies as much to the Europe as the other thing is. The Dutch show on this tour, they showed us this sign where the neighbours have been complaining about this cycle lane in this. So the Dutch have the same problems. It isn't all hunky dory. Oh, we just do this. They face the same challenges. So that's my three remedies.
Brilliant. Right, we're running close to the end of our question time, so I'm going to challenge you both with quick answers if you can, and hopefully we've got questions that lend themselves to that. So do you think the Dutch have been able to roll back from segregated lanes because they have established a culture of consideration via essentially clear segregated infrastructure? But we don't have the culture here. So the Dutch can break the rule because they've invested to then create the culture, but we're not ready to go that way without that culture. So I've asked a long question, but I'm hoping for very, very short answers.
I think the right infrastructure can alter the culture. That's what the principle I'm working on, and it will be slightly different in very low cycling. Well, it may be different in low cycling areas than high cycling areas, but the right, well, it's in the highway, for instance, in the highway code that cars don't go into cycle lanes unless you have to. So, and I think that is relatively general. So I think we can trust, not trust the wrong word, through the right infrastructure, we can begin to encourage cyclists and encourage drivers to respect cyclists.
Got it. Excellent. Right. Next question. Right. I'm not quite sure what this refers to because we've lost a bit of the order of the questions, but let's see how we go. Is it not that you have to look at the whole urban design to understand this? Unbundling of routes, filtering of streets, lower speed limits and enforcement is important. It may be dangerous to look at individual features on one street. Okay, so we're saying, how do we look at the big picture rather than just seeing these individual interventions? And that we have reference to a blog from David Hembro, who also does tours in the Netherlands.
Well, I agree. I mean, you look at everything, but each individual part makes up part of that bigger picture, and it depends on what you're trying to, how you're going. And what I'm saying is that cycle lanes, I mean, this is what the challenge to ATE, that cycle lanes are an essential part of that palette. They are a very essential part of the palette. And to say we're never going to do cycle lanes would be like saying we're never going to do cycle tracks. It's the same. It just doesn't make sense.
I agree entirely, and I have tried lecture. Well, I've lectured a few times on narrow roads. I mean, I'm sure everybody on the call knows that the Bylaw Act of the 19th century established 7.3 meters. Well, it was the equivalent in feet. Established 7.3 meters as a standard width of road, and we still have it. So you can't have segregation on roads like that. So you must have cycle lanes. And then the question is, what kind of cycle lane do you provide? I noticed a question, Roxanne, from Tim Wall.
Okay, have we missed that one? Feel free to tell us the question and answer, and then quickly, and then Ruth is our last question before we move on to the next section. So, Graham.
Tim Wall makes a comment that edge lane roads are considered inferior in the Netherlands. And I too have listened to Mark Wagenberg, and he's engaged in some of the tweeting that we've done about our trip. I think he's wrong.
Ooh,
I mean,
all right.
I think it's a personal opinion, and there's no evidence from what we've seen that he's anywhere near right.
Claire,
By the way,
let's
I'd
take
put that up
note.
and I'd agree.
Claire, let's take note and perhaps invite Mark to present a rebuttal.
Sorry, can I just say as the questioner there, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Having written them, they're fine, and I'd take them any day over what we've got.
Excellent. Okay, Ruth, you are our lucky last question of this particular session. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice trip. As you know, I go there a lot. Double yellow lines, parking. You touched on parking. We have this insane thing where they put all those lines where you can't park and the Dutch put where you can park. And I just wondered if you were able to talk to anyone about that, or did you notice that or note it? Because it is a real issue.
It's one of my favorite, I think we've talked about it before, it's one of my favorite bugbears. In Oxford, we have some central streets and a couple of large residential areas with restricted parking zones. Now, you'll all know that RPZs were promoted by the last Liberal Democrat Transport Minister, whose name is escaping me, who lives in Brighton, I think. He recommended RPZs, which is exactly what the Dutch do. In other words, you mark where you can park and everywhere else you can't. And so we could get rid of double yellow lines overnight if we adopted restricted parking zones everywhere. And I recommend it to all you engineers out there.
And I'll just add that all the quick ways in Oxford are enforced by WO lines. So the importance of the enforcement, I think it'd be lovely if Graham could get his way, but in the interim, WO lines rule the roost.
Well, very quickly, we used to have something called, there was something between 4 and 7 where you could not park anywhere on any carriageway, and I forgot what it's called, it's gone, but we don't seem to have that anymore. And that meant you didn't have painted lines, you just had a sign at the beginning and a sign at the end. And, you know, it was used for rush hour when rush hour was just between 4 and 7. But thank you.
But a question that I debated with Patrick is, how cheaply can you make what looks like a segregated cycle lane? Could you do it by putting grey paint down that looked like a curb, and then putting some red slurry behind, and then putting the double yellow lines outside of the it looks like a curb? Patrick was worried about this because it wasn't actually a curb. I don't know whether there's a definition in law about that, but I think we could have ersatz segregation at the cost of double yellow lines.
Okay, well, I'm going to close it off, and I will just say I don't think we should be looking just how to cut costs on cycling infrastructure. I'd rather see us fighting for more investment so that we can do it properly. But I would like to say a really big thank you to Patrick and Graham for sharing your pictures and your stories and insights from your travels in the Netherlands. And thank you to both of you and everyone attending for your patience with a few technical issues with the PowerPoint. It wouldn't work quite right before the session. We thought we had it worked out, and it decided to find a new way to be difficult. So thank you everyone for your patience while it didn't quite go right. Now, let's hope.
Can I say, do come to the cycle conference in July the 5th, 6th, and see Oxford in reality. I look forward to seeing you. Thank you. Thank you.
I hope to see you there, Patrick. I'll be coming, and I know many people in attending will also be there, and hopefully coming to Active Travel Cafe Live. More on that soon. Right, let's try and see if we can get some of the technical issues worked out for our next speaker. You all know and love Mark Philpott, Ranty Highwayman. I'm not sure what's on the agenda from you today, Marks, but I'm sure you can give us a great introduction. Over to you.
Right, I'm going to talk about something really new, exciting that we've never seen before anywhere, especially for Ruth. This one, she requested it on our chat. So let's have a look at the absolutely brand new, no one's ever done them before, continuous treatments. And of course, my poorly researched slides have not worked properly here. So what you should be seeing here is a little caption for Walton on the Naze in Essex, the high street there, which to my knowledge has had continuous footways there for well over 20 years. So there we go, newfangled, which has been around forever. Like everything else in highways, very, very little is new. So let's have a little dive into what's what about these. So I'm not going to read every single part of this. So this is just the powers we have to build continuous treatment. Section 66, Part 1 of the Highways Act is about building footways in or by the side of a highway. Section 65 is our powers for cycle tracks in or by the side of the highway. And both of those sit under a general improvement power under Section 62 of the Highways Act is let's go and build lots of different things. So the implication here, of course, is we can build footways and cycle tracks without traffic orders. So let's crack on into continuous treatments. We did have the hierarchy of road users coming in the latest highway code, that the only people, let's be honest, that read the highway code, that those want to score points on Twitter. However, from a designer point of view, I think this gives us absolutely massive free rein to do designs that reinforce walking priority across side streets and cycling priority across side streets. So you can go and read rules H, 2 and 3 for yourself. I'll also plug something which is probably a bit long in the tooth. However, little anecdote, continuous treatments were coined in this particular document back in 2015. Happy to find an earlier reference. Continuous footway junctions was my description. Blended came from Phil Jones, and I like to think I'm winning on the argument here, because continuous treatment is a bit more simple, I think, than blended, and I'll explain why in just a second. But essentially, the driver gives way to people going ahead. 4 diagrams, top left, very traditional in the UK, bottom left, a little bit better because we've got some tactile paving. Top right, speed humps inside roads, loads of those everywhere. There was a study done in London on how effective they are. Bottom right, continuous treatment. As I say, Water on the Naze have done it. There are countless examples, loads of things such as driveways, private access to car parks. It's a thing the UK have been doing for ages, so it's nothing new. Local Transport Note 120. This picks it out in a diagram on figure 1013. What we're talking about when we're talking about continuous treatments, it's the design priority batch, which are the 3 at the bottom. So we're not particularly relying on road markings to afford priority to walking and or cycling. The marked priority, the top 5, you are relying a lot more on road markings to actually get that priority in there. So we're dealing with the bottom 3 as in LTM 120. Just to make sure I'm not talking about just England, here's the Scottish design guidance, Cycling by Design. Couple of features here, diagram and sort of an isometric view. I would argue that they're relying too much on road markings here. We need a giveaway line as you come out, some shark's teeth as you go in, which in the UK mean hump rather than give way. So I think this is just falling a little bit short, and I'll explain towards the end why some of these cues matter. So interestingly, Glasgow City Council in the interim delivery plan has got some useful information on how you actually practically assess these things from a traffic flow point of view, which is interesting, useful information. I suspect it's come from some Dutch guidance, which I haven't quite got around to digging out yet. But essentially, we're talking about situations where traffic flow turning in and out the side road is fairly low, especially HGVs, and pedestrian flows are generally higher. And in Glasgow, there's some conditions that both roads involved a lower speed. We don't mess around with radius curbs. We don't run curbs across the continuous treatment, etc., etc. And we'll look at some of those details in just a second. But look that up for yourself. It's interesting and useful. Here's the Dutch guidance, which in this case doesn't have a cycle track. This is just purely the footway crossing. And what you see with the Dutch guidance is you can just see either side of the crossing point. There's these ramp curbs that the Dutch use that we now have in the UK. They're kind of suggesting an indicative radius between the side road curbs and the main road curb of about 5 meters. No reason why we can't tighten that up. And also the current Dutch guidance does suggest we have tactile paving either side. Their tactile paving is more about you're entering an area that could be shared with other vehicles, including cycles, rather than marking the edge of the actual crossing point. So anybody coming down the side road paths will reach those ramped curves before they hit the carriageway in any case. So just useful to bear in mind. So whistle-top tour around Europe. So on the left, a couple of examples from Malmö in Sweden, which are kind of continuous treatments. The top one probably a bit more like the London humped example. To the right, we've got Krimpen and De Lek, which is, well, beyond the outskirts of Rotterdam, but a little village there. Continuous footway treatment across the side road there. Bottom right is Billund in Denmark, almost the middle of nowhere where Legoland sits, but again, continuous footway and cycle track across this particular side road. Top left, Amsterdam. We all know Amsterdam well. Top right, Ettelbruck, on the outskirts of Luxembourg City. Bottom left, Maastricht, again, just a continuous footway with no cycle track. Bottom right, Odense in Denmark, again, a bit more difficult to pick it out, but it's still a continuous footway across this little side road. And then let's come to the UK. So here's our Waltham Forest, Claxon, top left in Leighton. Waltham Forest has decided to use the elephant's feet footprints across the side road. As I said earlier, we probably shouldn't be relying on road markings here, but it seems to work. Bottom left is Coventry that you saw a few weeks ago with the proper access curbs that we now have. Bottom right is Glasgow, which you've already seen here before. And top right is Romford, believe it or not, where there actually is a few little specks of some interesting layouts. And you might recognise the person on the bike not getting wiped out by the car. So that actually does work, even in Romford. Well worth reading the University of the West of England research on this. So there's a few studies going on. The one in particular is looking at side road study, observation and collisions by Fowler, Bellardo, Saint and Parkin. Now, interestingly here, where they're looking at sort of the various differences on these layouts, they're finding quite a high proportion of the actual pedestrians crossing the side roads yielding versus what drivers are doing. So in other words, if you've got some marked priority for walking, so you're making the drivers give way, you've about 73% of the time people crossing don't have to stop, they carry on. If it's a design priority junction, so those bottom three in LTM 120s, as I said earlier, that goes up to nearly 90%. And at control sites with nothing, which is just basic side roads, that's 43%. So through design, through the markings, it improves, but definitely through the design priority where it really looks like the footway continuing, that's where you get the best level of walking taking over. Kind of ignores a little bit what Glasgow have said with their flows, because design priority is probably bigger than the actual numbers of people using anything at any one time. They've also looked at, in another study here at the top, looking at design features. So this is the really important stuff. Keeping the continuity of the curb line on the main road, not building radiuses through the continuous treatment, continuing the mainline road marking. So if there's WL lines, they hug the curb on the main road through the junction. The use of vertical change in levels to slow traffic, continuing the materials and colours, continuance of the level through. That's the point of doing continuous treatments. It keeps walking and cycling at that same level. Good sight lines, visibility, been able to constrain drivers to keep them on their path or their route, and maximise the width of footways. That's quite important there. So it should be self-evident to everybody that's encountering it, no matter which mode of transport. So that's design things that we can actually build into these continuous treatments. Whereas the non-design features, which you can influence through network interactions, I guess. So low turning counts, that's filtering on a wide area. If we can have one-way operation of the side road, that reduces the number of turning conflicts. It's better for traffic coming out because they're very slow. It's a bit more predictable. Yes, yeah, area-wide traffic management, lower flows on the main road, and higher numbers of people walking and cycling. So we're trying to shift the balance towards higher movement for people walking and cycling, low movement for motor vehicles. And there's another little study at the bottom there from the same university. A couple of little sketches and ideas to kick around. So this is a sketch I did for a scheme in the north of the country, looking at adding some tactile paving to kind of the UK approach. So we've got this fairly narrow radius, if you were to sort of put over the top between the main road and the side road, just positioning the tactile paving so it's not going to be overrun, but still useful for visually impaired users. And in this case, it was a with flow cycle track with a very small buffer. And at the bottom, very cruelly, you can see WL lines taken straight through the junction. Some slightly better visuals here that I've done for various different bits and pieces. So the top is kind of how my ideal layout looks like. We've actually set back the giveaway point for drivers quite a way back from pedestrians. And we've also noticed here that the road is narrowed to as narrow as we can get to, really, for two-way traffic leaving the side road. Bottom left there, just an example if it's maybe a filtered road and we want to keep pedestrian priority over cyclists entering and leaving. And then to the right there, not continuous treatment at the side road, but continuous treatment mid-block with a shifting centre line and priority working for drivers, but visual and textural priority for people walking and cycling. So here is a really good image from Robert Wheatman's blog, which kind of reinforces the opposite of design priority. All sorts of things here going on. So this particular layout is inviting drivers to turn in with the radius curbs here. Kind of still look like a bit of a road hump, which is driver space generally. Lines here, double red lines leading us into the side road. All sorts of things going on, mixed messages to users. So that's a start of design priority, completely ruined in the execution. So really, really worth reading Robert's blog on this, because that goes into lots of detail on how this fits together. And then finally, this tickled my fancy a few weeks ago, cycling along between Rotterdam and Hook Holland, I think it was at the time, can't remember now. But forget the cars parked in the distance here, they have to cross the cycle track. The interesting thing for me here was this was a very, very tight space. So from a cycling point of view, there isn't a buffer as such, it's pretty much just a curb. And the reason for that was it's a slope curb to act as the parking. But what the Dutch have done very practically is they've put the entrance curb blocks in just here. The twins are over here out the way. And just to get around those, they've swept the cycle path in and back again over a very, very short distance. So you can probably just see it out here where this car is exiting. So even in tight spots and awkward spots, the Dutch have managed to do a continuous treatment. And there we go, that's me.
Thank you so much, Mark. Brilliant. I think all of us learned a bit today as well. And if you bear with me, I've just got some questions flying in that I just need to put into some order before I lose them. Okay, so please put your questions in the chat, everyone. Use question so that I can easily spot when they are coming in, or use the hands up feature on Zoom if you'd like to ask a short question in person. All right, Mark, are you ready? Mark, what is your view on providing blister tactile paving at an approach to a continuous crossing? And this has come up in a few places, I know.
We should do, is a short answer. We've been asked to do it. It's not difficult to do it, so why not?
Yep, okay. Love a quick answer too. There's a slight typo in this, so I hope I'm getting it right. Is it chicken or egg for design priority being used at locations where the side road is very low traffic or not a through route?
I think possibly the question's around, so if the side road's a bit busy now, should we be putting the continuous treatment in? So the answer to that should be maybe perhaps. I know it's a bit of a cop-out, but I think the problem is if you've got lots of turning traffic especially with HGVs, you do run the risk of kind of defeating the point of doing this. So yes, we need to roll them out where we can, but also have a mind on what actually is going on locally. Because if it really is that busy, then we should probably looking at a slightly different design treatment. So maybe a marked priority with zebras across the side road, like a parallel zebra crossing. Maybe inset the walking and cycling space back so there's a slightly larger buffer. So yeah, it is down to the individual location.
Yeah, dare I suggest, based on some of the conversations we've had before, that we must look at the big picture and not just individual treatments as well. Oh, I've been attending class. I say, Graham, I see your hand. I'm just going to get through one more of the questions I've got from the chat, and then I'll come to you. Right, question, very quick. Please, can you go back and explain the off-center design?
Oh, was this okay? 2 seconds. Let me. Yes, still running. This was this one. Oops, this one here. So this particular layout was. Oh goodness me, I can't remember what it was now. But I drew this up in response to again Twitter as usual. But the issue here was that there was a local campaign to try and make cycle traffic give way to motor traffic on what is a really quiet side road. So I said, rather than doing that, let's redesign things and turn it on its head. So from a driver point of view, driving on the left, as you approach this, it's a crossroads, for want of a better description, the road layout basically says to you, you have to give way to oncoming traffic or oncoming something, and then vice versa for people coming the other direction. So we've shifted the centre line here. You probably can't stuff two-way traffic through. Someone's got to slow down and give way. But we've also, through texture, colour, materials, we've prioritised the cycling route through here. We've also prioritised the walking route through here. And just with the tactiles, that's just to give visually impaired people a guide that they're crossing either cycle space or general traffic space. So that was in response to a fairly specific issue. But it just shows we can do a continuous treatment, maybe not always at side roads.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. Yeah, I hope so. I'm sorry, I've lost the names associated with the questions, but if I get a thumbs up in a chat, then I'll know we got there. Graham, over to you for your question.
Roxanne, I think either you or Mark, I can't remember which one, we're talking about a bigger picture. A friend of mine, an engineer in Germany, did a scheme. There were 3 small towns near Maastricht called Helene, Sittard, and a third one that I can't remember. And he worked on making, and the city council, the new city council, wanted the towns to be seen as connected rather than separate. And so he got the job of making them feel connected. And there's a continuous unobstructed cycle lane and footpath running between these 2 towns, designed from scratch, added into what was previously a 3-lane road, I think. And it's a sight to behold. I mean, it has crossroads that don't look like crossroads and road centre parking. I don't know whether Mark knows it. I'll send some pictures that I've even got the engineering drawings of them all. It's just beautiful. And there's also a scheme. There's a fantastic scheme in Amsterdam on Boilerlaan, where on Street View you can see a kind of querulous straight on replaced by a coloured straight on, replaced by an even better, fantastic straight on, which.
Okay, Graham, I'm just going to say we're venturing off question time now, and we're over time. So I'm going to take that as a comment. There's some interesting things to look at in the towns around Maastricht. And Mark, I'm really sorry, but your video is having a party of its own over there. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Back to normal. Right, everyone, we are at the end. So I'm going to just give you a quick pitch about next week and then let you all get on with what is still a sunny evening. Right, next week we've got Stefan Rolnick from Lin PR on misinformation. He is a specialist on misinformation and disinformation across a variety of sectors. And I tell you right now, I'll be doing my best to tune in from the Netherlands for that one. Please make sure we record it. We also have Chris Paul, who is one of 12 presentees he's picked to pitch to the Transport Select Committee on the future of transport, and he wants to try his pitch out on us first. He's very brave. I think will be harsher than the Transport Select Committee. So really, I think a brilliant one to come to next week, and I hope to see you all there. And before I let you all go, just a reminder, please everyone, let's be kind and respectful to each other in the chat always. We all have the same goal. Let's help each other get there kindly. All right, everybody, see you next week.